That night, I had exactly 20 minutes to change my life. In the next room, my father was snoring, the same man who had slammed his hat onto the dinner table earlier and announced, "This Sunday you are marrying Billy. I have already taken the money." Billy was a 40-year-old man known for his cruelty all over Jasper, and I was just an 18-year-old girl who had just buried her sister. I looked at my mother, hoping she would say something, but she just turned away, whispering a sentence that made my blood run cold. "Endure it, child. Women are born to suffer." At that moment, I knew I had two choices: wither away like my sister Emily, or risk death to escape this very night. Hello, friends. Please come in and have some hot tea. I am Margaret Miller. Today, I want to tell you about the night I escaped hell to find myself again. But before we turn back time to that fateful night, I would love to know where my friends are tuning in from. Please leave a comment letting me know which city or country you are listening from. It is so heartwarming to know that no matter the geographical distance, we are still sitting here together, isn't it? I was born in a simple little house on the outskirts of Jasper, there where the town starts to turn into farmland. It was a wooden house with a porch that creaked when the wind blew hard, and a roof that leaked on stormy nights, but it still seemed cozy to a child's eyes. We were a family of 4. Me, my sister Emily, my mother Ruth, and my father Frank Miller. Ah, my little sister Emily. She was 3 years younger than me, a girl of fragile appearance, like a little bird fallen from the nest. She had hair so light it looked almost white when the sun hit it, and a sweet smile that lit up any dark corner of the house. Since she was tiny, Emily had weak health. She caught colds easily, had that cough that came, and did not want to leave in the harsh winters of the Midwest. I remember seeing her wrapped up in blankets, even on days that were not that cold. My mother, Ruth, was a quiet woman, of few words and even fewer smiles. She spent her days taking care of the house, washing clothes in the metal tub in the yard, cooking what we had, which wasn't much. When I think of her now, I always remember her hands rough from so much work, her posture stooped, as if she carried an invisible weight on her back, and her eyes that seemed always distant, looking at a place where no one else could see. And my father, Frank Miller, was a foreman at a large cattle ranch in the region. A tall man, with broad shoulders and heavy hands. He arrived home always smelling of livestock and bourbon, bringing with him a silence that made the whole house hold its breath. When he entered, it was as if the air became thinner, harder to breathe. He didn't talk much, no. He preferred gestures to words. And his gestures were not always gentle, especially with my mother and little Emily. Our routine started early with the rooster crowing. Emily and I shared a straw mattress in a small room at the back of the house. We woke up with my mother calling softly, "Girls, it's time." Before the sun even rose, we were already helping with the chores. Fetching water from the well, feeding the chickens, sweeping the yard. After that, I went to the public school. A walk of almost an hour along dirt roads. Emily rarely went. "She doesn't have the health for that," my father would say, although I knew it was more because he thought schooling for a girl was a waste of time. At school, I was one of those who liked to learn the most. The teacher, Mrs. Nancy, used to say I had a good head for letters. I dreamed of being a teacher one day, having a classroom all my own, teaching children to read and write, but I kept that dream very quiet in my heart, because at home there was no space for dreams like that. When I came back from school, I spent the rest of the day helping my mother and taking care of Emily. We played when there was time, inventing stories with rag dolls my grandmother had made, or running through the yard, chasing the butterflies that visited our flowers. Emily had a special way of seeing beauty in the simplest things. A colored stone, a leaf of a different shape, the way the light entered through the cracks of the window in the late afternoon. "Look, Margaret, it looks like melted gold," she would say. And I could see it too, through her eyes. The weekends were the hardest days. My father stayed home and the tension grew like a storm cloud. He demanded absolute silence for his rest, and any little noise, the dragging of a slipper on the wooden floor, a cough from Emily, the clinking of a plate, could awaken his fury. "This house has no discipline," he shouted. And then came the punishment, usually for my mother, for not controlling the children properly. There were good days, too. I don't want you to think it was only sadness. At the harvest festival, when the community gathered to give thanks for the crops, there was music, food, and dancing. My father was milder on those days. Maybe out of respect for the neighbors, maybe because of the bourbon that flowed freely. In those rare moments, he would even pick Emily up, call her my little princess, and I almost believed he could be a father like the others. It was around the time I was 9 that I started to notice the worst in my father. It wasn't just the difficult temperament or the heavy hands when he was angry. It was his look toward Emily, a look of contempt mixed with anger, as if her very existence offended him deeply. Sickly girl, only gives me expenses. He grumbled when he thought no one was listening. Emily was 6 years old at the time, and her health seemed to get worse with every winter that passed. She coughed until she ran out of air. She had fevers that came and went. Dr. Walter, the town doctor, who attended us as a favor when things got very ugly, said once that she needed expensive medicines, better nutrition, warmth, and special care. I'm not going to spend what I don't have on a weakness God sent, was my father's answer. If she has to go, she goes. I'm not going to break my back, working to support someone who won't be good for anything in life. I want you to understand something about fear. Real fear isn't just a racing heart. It's a silence that eats you from the inside out. Living in that house was like walking on a frozen lake that was constantly cracking. You learn to make yourself small. You learn to stop breathing. You learn that being invisible is the only way to survive. I watched my father erase my sister's existence day by day, and the terrifying part wasn't just his cruelty, it was my mother's silence. Her silence was a permission slip for his violence. And in that silence, I started to believe that maybe we deserved it. That maybe we were just things to be used and discarded. That was when my father's special treatments to toughen up Emily began. When she coughed a lot at night and didn't let anyone sleep, he took her to the tool shed, a cold and damp place at the back of the lot. You're going to learn to control that cough, he said. In the morning, we found Emily curled up in a corner shaking with cold, her lips blue, but without making a single sound. When she couldn't eat everything on her plate, and it was truly difficult since my sister had little appetite, she went without the next meal. Those who don't value what they have on the table don't deserve more, was what he said. My mother watched everything with that distant look I mentioned. Sometimes, in secret, she brought a piece of bread or a fruit to Emily. Other times, she simply turned her face and continued her chores as if nothing was happening. I, small and powerless, didn't understand why she didn't do more to protect my sister. Only many years later did I understand that she herself was broken inside, incapable of protecting even herself. And so went the years of my childhood in Jasper, divided between the school that gave me hope and the house that taught me fear. I grew strong, despite everything, while Emily seemed to wither like a little flower without enough water. With each passing year, the shine in her eyes diminished a little. The smile appeared less frequently, her voice became quieter. When I was 12 and Emily 9, there was a particularly harsh winter. The frosts were so strong they left everything white until almost noon. The biting north wind cut like a knife, and our little wooden house seemed like paper against it. It was that winter that I felt for the first time the true fear of losing my sister. In that winter of my 12th year, things at home started to get even worse. The crop that year had been bad because of the early frosts, and my father had lost part of his employment at the ranch. He still worked there a few days a week, but the money wasn't the same anymore. And when the money decreased, his mood collapsed along with it. I remember the day I arrived from school and found our little house quieter than normal. There was no sound of my mother stirring pots, nor the soft humming of Emily, who even sick liked to hum those old songs our grandmother taught. A heavy silence, the kind that seems to announce misfortune. I found Emily curled up under our bed, trembling. I don't know if from cold or fear. When she saw me, she put her little finger in front of her lips, asking for silence. "What is it, Emily?" I whispered, crouching down to see her better. "Dad came home early," she replied, so quietly I could barely hear. "He said I'll have to work to help at home." My heart tightened. Emily could barely stand for long without the cough knocking her down. What kind of work did my father imagine she could do? The answer came the next morning, when he dragged Emily out of bed before the sun even rose. "Starting today, you're going to the ranch with me. There's plenty of work there that even a useless girl like you can do. But Dad," I tried to intervene. "Emily doesn't have the strength for that. She barely manages." I didn't finish the sentence. A look from him was enough to silence me. That look that said everything without needing words. "Don't interfere, or it will be worse." And so, from that day on, Emily started going with my father to the ranch, where she worked in the kitchen for the farmhands, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, carrying buckets of water. She returned at the end of the day exhausted, her hands red from sores, her breathing more difficult than ever. "How was it there, Emily?" I asked while helping her lie down. "I'm helping the family, Margaret," was what she replied with a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad said now I'm good for something. At night, I heard her cough get worse, that dry sound that seemed to tear her chest. I got up to wet a cloth in water and put it on her forehead when the fever rose. I asked my mother to call the doctor, but she just shook her head. "Your father said we don't have money for a doctor. Besides, it's just a strong flu. It will pass." But it wasn't just a flu, and it didn't pass. In the following weeks, I saw my little sister waste away like a plant without sun or water. Her skin, which was already pale, became almost transparent. You could see the blue veins in her temples. Her eyes, increasingly sunken, lost that shine that made everything seem magical. The cough got worse and sometimes came with a red stain on the handkerchief she used to cover her mouth. On a particularly cold night, when my father wasn't home, I gathered courage and confronted my mother. "Emily is dying, Mom. Can't you see? We need to do something." My mother stopped what she was doing. She stood motionless for a time that seemed infinite. Then, without turning to me, she said with a voice I had never heard before, a voice loaded with an ancient sadness, "Some people are born just to suffer in this life, Margaret. We can't do anything against God's will, or your father's. Have you ever seen a bird in a cage with the door wide open, yet it refuses to fly? That was my mother. She had been trapped in that house so long that she started believing the cage was the only world that existed. It is a terrible thing to witness when a person gives up on their own humanity just to survive one more day." Those words fell like stones on my child's heart. How could a mother speak like that about her own daughter? How could she accept all that without doing anything? It was the first time I felt anger toward my mother, an anger mixed with a deep disappointment that never left me. When Emily turned 13, she could almost no longer go to the ranch. My father, instead of allowing her to rest, found a new way to make her useful. He started taking her to the houses of rich families in Bloomington, where she worked as a maid, washing, ironing, cooking. Chores too heavy for her fragile body. Dr. Walter said she has weak lungs, Dad, I tried to explain once. He said she needs rest. "What she needs is to stop being a dead weight in this family," he replied, slamming the table so hard the plates jumped. "If she can't help, it's better she isn't even here." And in those houses where she went to work, Emily faced new types of cruelty. It wasn't just the heavy chores, it was the way they treated her. The sick girl, they called her, or the poor little thing, but they didn't stop her from carrying heavy buckets or scrubbing the floor on her knees. Some employers were kinder. They gave her leftover food to bring home or an old jacket that didn't fit their children anymore. But others. "Today, Mrs. Zumira left me without lunch," Emily told me once, her eyes full of water. She said I broke a very expensive plate and that its value was going to come out of my food. I boiled with rage, but what could I do? I was just a 5-year-old girl, without any power in that world, which seemed to spin only according to the will of adults, especially men. It was around this time that I met Ethan, the son of the general store owner, where we bought on credit when money ran out. A boy with kind eyes, a few years older than me, who always set aside a small package of cookies or a fruit when he saw me arrive. "It's for your little sister," he said, putting the bundle in my bag without his father seeing. My mother also had weak lungs. I know what it's like. Ethan was the first to show me that not everyone in the world was cruel, that there were hands that reached out to help, not to hurt. When I told him how things were at home, he listened with attention, without judging, without giving advice impossible to follow. He just listened, and sometimes that was all I needed, someone who really listened. In the winter, Emily turned 14. She almost didn't leave her bed anymore. The cough had turned into a horrible thing, coming in attacks so strong they left her breathless, her face red, her eyes wide with terror. The effort to breathe was so much that you could see her ribs moving under her almost transparent skin. "Dad, please," I begged one night, kneeling before him. "Emily needs to go to the hospital in Evansville. She is dying." For the first time, I saw something in his look that could be confused with worry. It wasn't love, of that I am sure, but maybe the fear of others' opinion, of being judged for what was happening right under his roof. "Let's wait until the weekend," he said finally. "If she doesn't improve, I'll take her." But the weekend was too far away. 3 days after that conversation, I woke up in the middle of the night with a sound I will never forget. A wet bubbling, like water boiling in a pot, coming from my sister's throat. I ran to her and saw the horror stamped on her face, her lips already purple, her hands clutching the sheets with such force that her knuckles were white. "Mom! Dad! Emily is dying!" I screamed in despair. My father appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled, his eyes still blurred with sleep and bourbon. He looked at Emily, who was thrashing in bed, fighting for every gulp of air, and said the sentence that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Let her be. If she's to go, let her go quickly and stop being a bother." It is chilling to hear a father speak with such coldness, isn't it? But hold on, because this unbearable tragedy is actually the spark that ignites a fire within Margaret that no one saw coming. That night, I held my sister in my arms while life left her little by little. I sang Grandma's songs, smoothed her hair, told her I loved her more than anything in the world. I don't know if she heard me, but I want to believe she did. That in her last moments she felt there was at least one person in this world to whom she mattered for real. When the sun rose, Emily was no longer with us. Her small and fragile body had finally found the rest that life never allowed. The day that followed Emily's death was a blur of disconnected images and sounds in my memory. I remember the strong smell of coffee in the kitchen, mixed with the sweet and strange aroma coming from our room, where my sister's body waited. I remember my father's voice, rough as always, giving orders. "Go call Mr. Gervais from the funeral home. Say it's a simple thing, that we don't have money to waste." I moved like a ghost through the house, as if my body were there, but I myself had departed along with my sister. My mother cleaned the house furiously, as if she wanted to erase any trace of Emily. At one point, I saw her gathering my sister's few clothes into a bundle. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm going to give this all away. It has no use here anymore," she replied, without looking at me. "But Mom, it's all that's left of her. Better not to keep dead people's things, Margaret. It brings bad luck." It was the first time I felt that not only had I lost my sister, but also any chance of preserving her memory in that house. It was as if everyone wanted to pretend Emily had never existed. The wake was simple in our own room. Emily, dressed in the only good dress she had, a light blue one, faded from so many washes, seemed to be just sleeping. Her face, for the first time in a long time, showed no signs of suffering or fear. Some neighbors came, brought coffee and cornbread muffins, prayed the rosary with us. Father Ryan from the parish appeared quickly, gave a brief blessing. "Angel of the Lord," he called Emily. And that gave me some comfort. At least someone saw my sister for what she really was. An angel who passed through this earth only in transit, without having truly known what human warmth was. Few bothered to go to the cemetery the next day. Besides our family, only Ethan, who stayed by my side the whole time holding my hand when I thought I was going to collapse, and 2 or 3 closer neighbors. It was a cloudy day, with a fine drizzle that left everything with a sad sheen, as if the sky itself was crying what my mother couldn't cry. It was there, in front of that open grave, while Emily's simple coffin was lowered into the earth, that it happened. We were standing in silence, my father, my mother, and I, when I felt a movement beside me. My father leaned in, getting so close I could smell his sour breath of morning bourbon. Then, in a whisper that only I could hear, he said the words that would freeze my blood. "Now only you are left." It wasn't just what he said, but the way he said it. There was something in his voice, a sinister promise, a poorly disguised threat that made me understand, in an instant, that Emily's fate could very well be mine, that now, without my sister to absorb part of his anger, all of it would turn on me. In panic, I sought my mother's gaze, always, since I was little, even knowing she did little to protect us. I still looked to her for some sign that there was an ally there, someone who would understand my fear. Our eyes met for a second and I begged her, silently, "Save me." And then something happened that broke the last thread of hope I still kept. She laughed, a short, stifled, cynical laugh that sounded like glass grinding together. She added, "At least this one is stronger. She'll take longer to break." I know how cruel that sounds, my dears. You are probably asking yourselves, what kind of mother laughs at her child's grave? But looking back, I realized that wasn't a laugh of joy. It was the sound of a woman whose mind had finally snapped under the weight of her own cowardice. Fear doesn't just break bones. It twists souls until they are unrecognizable. My heart didn't just break in that moment. It froze. That laugh was my sentence. It told me that my mother wasn't a victim anymore. She was an accomplice. She wasn't going to save me because she needed me to be the new target, so she could stay safe in the shadows. I realized I was completely alone, and that realization is what kills the child inside you, but wakes up the survivor. The walk back home was the longest of my life. Every step took me back to the place that I now knew for certain was no longer a home, but a prison where I would be the next victim. Ethan tried to talk to me, ask if I would be okay, if there was anything he could do, but I could barely answer. How to explain the horror I had just comprehended? How to tell someone that your own parents are anxiously waiting for your suffering? The days that followed confirmed my fears. With Emily out of the way, my father concentrated on me all the cruelty he previously divided between the two of us. The difference is that it wasn't my supposed physical weakness that irritated him anymore. It was my strength, my resistance, which seemed to be a challenge to him. "Those letters of yours won't do you any good," he said, tearing my school books. "What you need is to learn to be a real woman." To be a woman, in my father's view, meant to serve without questioning, accept any treatment without complaining, bend to the will of men, first his, then that of a future husband he made clear he was already planning to get for me. Raymond's son, the one who has the shop on the corner of the square, is looking for a wife. "I already told him you are available," he announced one day during dinner. "He isn't a handsome boy, but he has means. He'll get you off my back." Raymond had a son, yes, Billy, already pushing 40, known in town for his violent temper and for mistreating stray animals. The idea of being handed over to him gave me nightmares for weeks. It was at this time that my mother started to change too. Not for the better, for the worse. If before she was distant, now she seemed to have developed an active hostility against me. She criticized everything I did. She said I was a smart aleck, that I thought I was better than everyone just because I knew how to read and write well. "Your sister, at least, knew her place," she said once while I was washing dishes. "You have that look that irritates me. It looks like you're always judging me." And she was right. I judged her. Yes, I judged her cowardice, her complicity with my father's cruelty, her failure to be the mother both Emily and I needed. The difference is that, unlike Emily, I didn't hide this judgment. It was there, in my eyes, in my posture, in the refusal to bend completely. Little by little, my life became a daily hell. I woke up before dawn to do all the housework. I went to the ranch to substitute the work that was previously Emily's, returned to finish the domestic chores, cook, clean, wash. There was no more time for school. My father forbade it, saying I had already learned too many letters. At night, locked in the small room I used to share with my sister, I felt Emily's ghost beside me. It wasn't fear, it was comfort. Sometimes I talked to her in whispers, telling her about my day, my worries, my impossible escape plans. "I'm going to get out of here one day, Emily," I promised in the dark. "I'm going to find a way." But what way? I had no money, nowhere to go, nobody who could really help me. Ethan, as kind as he was just a boy under his own father's authority. And in the small towns of the Midwest, back then, a father's word was law. No one meddled in family matters, even if those matters involved abuse and cruelty. As the months passed, I felt my spirit, once so strong, beginning to yield. It was as if a light inside me was dimming, getting weaker every day. I started to wonder if my mother was right. Maybe it was easier to accept, to bow down, to stop fighting. Maybe the fate of women like us was really this: to serve, suffer, and eventually disappear without leaving a mark. On a particularly terrible night, when my father arrived drunk and furious for having lost money gambling, he broke almost everything in the kitchen, beat my mother until she fainted, and then came after me. I managed to lock myself in the small room, pushing the dresser against the door while he punched the wood from the outside. "You won't escape forever," he shouted. "Sooner or later, I'll teach you respect." Curled up in the corner of the room, praying the door would hold, I made a decision. If I stayed there, I would end up like Emily, or worse, like my mother, a shadow of a person empty inside. I had to find a way out, whatever it was. The next morning, while I was cleaning up the shards of glass and dried blood on the kitchen floor, a knock on the front door startled me. We weren't expecting anyone, and visitors were not common in our house. The people of the town, even without knowing exactly what happened inside, sensed something was wrong and kept their distance. I opened the door fearfully and faced an elderly gentleman I had never seen before. He had white hair, a face wrinkled by time and sun, and eyes of a blue so light they seemed almost transparent. Eyes that, I realized with a start, reminded me a lot of Emily's. "Good morning, girl," he said with a deep but gentle voice. "Is this the house of Frank Miller?" "Yes, it is," I replied to the white-haired gentleman, still holding the door ajar, fearful. "My father isn't here. He went out to work at the ranch." "And your mother?" he asked, looking over my shoulder into the house. "Is she lying down?" "She didn't feel well during the night," I replied without going into details about what had really happened. The man nodded, an understanding look crossing his wrinkled face. "I understand. My name is Arthur Evans. I am your maternal grandfather's brother. God rest his soul. I heard about your sister's death. Too late, unfortunately. You might wonder where he was all those years. But you have to understand, back then, families like ours were islands. My father built walls of silence around us so high that no one could see inside. It makes me wonder, how many silent walls are standing in your neighborhood right now? Tell me, do we still look away too often these days?" I stood paralyzed for a moment. A great uncle. I had never heard of him. My mother rarely mentioned her family, and when she did, it was always vaguely, as if they were people from a past too distant to matter. "Can you excuse me, my daughter? I would like to pay my respects," he continued, gentle but firm. There was a natural authority in his voice that made me open the door without questioning. Great Uncle Arthur entered our simple house with a dignity that seemed out of place in that environment of misery and despair. He carried a small worn leather suitcase and a hat he held respectfully in his hands. He sat in the chair I offered him, observing the room with attentive eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. But he didn't look at the broken plates or the stains on the floor. He looked at me. Do you know how rare that is? To be really seen? For years, I was just a nuisance to my father and a reminder of failure to my mother. But Uncle Arthur looked at me and I felt human again. He saw the trembling in my hands. He saw the way I flinched when the wind slammed the shutter. He saw the war zone written on my skin. "I come from Indianapolis," he explained. "I only heard of the girl's passing." "What was her name again?" "Emily," I replied, feeling the familiar pain tighten my chest. "My sister Emily." "Emily," he repeated with respect. "I only heard of her passing when I ran into an acquaintance from Jasper by chance. I came as soon as I could, but the roads are difficult with all this rain." At that moment, I heard a noise coming from my parents' room. My mother had woken up. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face swollen, a dark bruise forming near her left eye. "Uncle Arthur," she said, voice choked with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Ruth." He stood up but didn't approach her. There was a deep sadness in his look. "I came too late for your girl's funeral. I am so sorry." I saw something strange happen on my mother's face. For a brief instant, a genuine emotion, maybe shame, maybe remorse, seemed to cross her normally empty features, but it lasted only a second, soon replaced by the familiar mask of indifference. "You didn't need to bother, sir," she said coldly. "It was just pneumonia. Things happen." Great Uncle Arthur didn't answer immediately. his eyes, so similar to Emily's, fixed on my mother's bruised face. Then they passed to me, noticing the finger marks on my arms I was trying to hide, pulling down the sleeves of my dress. "I'm going to stay in town for a few days," he announced finally. "If it's not a bother, I would like to visit you again. It's been a long time since I've seen my grandniece." My mother seemed uncomfortable, but had no way to refuse without seeming rude. "As you wish, Uncle, but our house is simple. We don't have much to offer." "I don't need luxury, Ruth, just a little family company." When he said goodbye, promising to return the next day, I felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. There was something about that man, a dignity, a quiet strength that made me feel he wasn't like the other people in town, who pretended not to see what happened in our house, but I also knew his presence could enrage my father, and that never ended well for anyone. My fears were confirmed that very night. When we told my father about Great-Uncle Arthur's visit, he exploded. Meddlesome old man. What did he come for? To stick his nose where it's not wanted? Nobody from that Evans family is any good. They're all the same, full of airs of grandeur, but without a dime in their pocket. My mother, as always, lowered her head and said nothing. I, however, couldn't contain myself. He just came to pay respects for Emily. He's family. It was a mistake. My father turned to me like an enraged bull. "Family? The only family you have is me, and I am already fed up with this attitude of yours. Do you think I didn't notice how you looked at me at the funeral of that useless sister of yours? As if I were to blame for her being too weak to live." "Emily wasn't weak," I screamed, losing completely the notion of danger. Something inside me had snapped. Maybe the last thread of fear that still controlled me. "She died because you mistreated her all her life, because you sent her to work sick, because you let her go hungry as punishment, because you locked her in the shed in winter." The silence that followed was more frightening than any scream. My father looked at me with a hatred so pure it seemed almost to transform him into another person. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and trembling with contained rage. "Tomorrow I am going to talk to Raymond's son. You are going to marry him next week, even if you have to be tied up, and if you open this mouth one more time, it will be to eat your own teeth." Margaret is now backed into a corner with time running out. Don't go anywhere, because she is about to make a desperate choice that will either save her life or seal her fate forever. That night, I locked myself in the room, as usual, pushing the dresser against the door, but this time, I knew it wasn't enough. The threat of forced marriage to Billy, Raymond's son, wasn't a bluff. My father would do it, and I would be handed over to a man as cruel as him, or worse. Sitting on the bed I once shared with Emily, I cried like I hadn't cried since the day of the funeral. They weren't tears just of fear or sadness. They were tears of a rage I had never allowed myself to feel completely. Rage for what they did to my sister, for what they were trying to do to me, for all the years of silence and terror. "I won't let this happen, Emily," I whispered to my sister's ghost, who seemed more present than ever. "I won't end up like you or like Mom. I prefer to die trying to escape." The next day, my father left early, determined to speak with Raymond and his son. My mother, still marked by the blows of the previous night, avoided looking at me. She was arranging the house frantically, as she always did when she was nervous. "Why did you never run away?" I asked her suddenly, while sweeping the living room floor. She stopped what she was doing, frozen for a moment, as if the question were a slap. "Run away to where, Margaret?" she replied finally, voice void of emotion. "To go back to my father's house, which was equal or worse, to live on the charity of others? A woman alone has nowhere to go in this world, and you prefer to live like this, being beaten, seeing your daughters suffer? You don't understand," she said, and for an instant I saw a glimmer of the young woman she must have been one day before life broke her. "Some people are born to suffer. I am one of them. Your sister was another. I had hoped you were different, but do you see? In the end, we all fall into the same well." Those words, instead of discouraging me, ignited an even greater determination inside me. I would not be like my mother. I would not accept that fate as inevitable. It was around noon that Great-Uncle Arthur appeared again, as promised. This time, without my father home, I invited him to enter and sit. I offered the little we had, a weak coffee and some cornbread muffins I had made in the morning. The old gentleman sat down, observing the interaction between my mother and me. I don't know exactly what he saw, but his light eyes seemed to see beyond appearances, beyond unsaid words, straight to the rotten heart of that house. "Ruth," he said suddenly, voice soft but firm. "Do you remember when you were a girl, before marrying this man?" My mother, who was turned away fixing something on the shelf, stopped, her shoulders tensed. "I remember, yes," she replied without turning around. "I saw that same look on your face when you were a child," continued the great-uncle, now looking at me. "That same fear, that same resignation starting to take over. I did nothing back then. I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late, until you were already trapped in this marriage." He paused, as if pondering his next words with care. "I won't make the same mistake twice," he concluded. The rest of that day passed in a strange calm, like the silence that precedes a great storm. My mother avoided looking directly at Great-Uncle Arthur, as if she were afraid of what might be reflected in his eyes. As for me, I felt a confused mixture of hope and mistrust. After all, in my 18 years of life, I learned that kindness rarely came without a price. The great-uncle stayed until almost dusk, asking apparently casual questions about life in the house, about how I spent my days, about my plans for the future. I answered with caution, without revealing the complete horror of our situation. But something told me he already knew, or at least suspected, the truth behind our measured words. When he finally said goodbye, he took my hands between his, rough from a lifetime of work, but gentle in the way they held mine. "Margaret, you have my mother's eyes," he said. "Eyes of someone who wasn't born to bow down." Then, in a movement so subtle I almost didn't notice, he slipped a small, folded paper into the palm of my hand. Only after he left did I manage to read the message written in that shaky handwriting of an elderly person. "I will be at the corner of the church at midnight. Bring only the essentials. A." I read and reread those words, barely believing what they meant. It was an offer of escape, a hand extended at the exact moment I needed it most. But distrust, constant companion of those who live in fear, made me hesitate. What if it was a trap? What if my father had found out and planned all this to test me? My father's return at nightfall pushed away any doubt I might have had. He entered the house triumphant, smelling of bourbon and satisfaction. "It's all settled," he announced, throwing his hat on the table. "Sunday you are going to marry Billy, Raymond's son. He agreed to pay a dowry so that you're good for something, after all." My mother, kneeling by the wood stove, just nodded as if we were talking about the weather or the harvest. Not my future being sold. "Dad." I tried one last time, voice as calm as I could manage. "I don't want to marry Billy. He's old enough to be my father and everyone knows he mistreats people." My father stared at me, and there was a satisfied cruelty in his eyes that froze me inside. "Do you think you have a choice? Do you think anyone cares what you want? You will marry him, and you will be an obedient wife, or you will regret being born." In that moment, looking at that man who should protect me, but who was always my greatest threat, I knew Great-Uncle Arthur's note was my only chance. No matter the risk, anything would be better than the fate awaiting me as Billy's wife. During dinner, I kept my eyes down and answered only what was necessary. I wanted to appear defeated, submissive, so as not to raise suspicions. Inside, however, my mind worked frantically, planning what to take, what clothes to wear, how to leave the house without making noise. When everyone went to bed, I stayed awake, lying in the darkness, counting the minutes. The living room clock marked 11 o'clock, when I heard my father's heavy snoring coming from the room next door. I waited a little longer, just to be sure. Then, I got up silently. There was little to take. A few changes of clothes, an old photo where Emily, my grandmother, and I appeared, the only good memory I kept, and the small mother-of-pearl brooch that had belonged to my sister. I wrapped everything in a large handkerchief, the kind of bundle that wouldn't attract attention in case someone saw me leaving. I was about to open the back door when a shadow moved in the darkness of the kitchen. I stifled a scream, ready to run back to my room, when I recognized the familiar outline. "Mom!" Ruth was standing there, a silhouette against the weak moonlight entering through the window. In her hands, a small bundle. "You're leaving?" she said, not as a question, but as a statement. I froze without knowing what to answer. If she told my father, everything would be lost. Yes, I admitted finally. There was no point in lying. I'm going with Great Uncle Arthur. I expected anger, maybe a threat to wake my father. Instead, she extended the small package into my hands. It's a little money, she explained, voice almost a whisper. It's not much, but it will help in the beginning. And this was your grandmother's. Inside the wrapping, beside some crumpled bills, I found a thin gold chain with a small crucifix. Mom, I started, confused by that unexpected gesture. Why are you helping me? I thought. I thought you wanted me to suffer like you? She completed, and for the first time in years I saw tears in her eyes. Maybe a part of me wanted to. Yes, it is easier to believe we must all suffer than to admit I could have chosen differently. She came closer, touching my face with trembling fingers in a rare gesture of tenderness. When Uncle Arthur looked at me today, I saw in his eyes the girl I was, the girl who had dreams before becoming. This. I don't want this for you, Margaret. I never did. Come with me, I pleaded, holding her hands. We can both go. Uncle Arthur would help you too. She smiled sadly, shaking her head. It is too late for me, daughter. I wouldn't know how to live any other way anymore. I am already hollowed out. It took me decades to forgive her for staying behind. But in that moment, standing in the dark kitchen, I realized something that broke my heart. She knew she was too damaged to be saved. Her last act as a mother wasn't to protect herself, but to push me out the door before I became just like her. But it isn't too late for you. Go and don't look back. Live the life I didn't have the courage to seek. I looked at her, this woman who had laughed at my sister's grave, and I didn't feel hate anymore. I felt a pity so deep it hurt. She was the ghost of what happens when you let fear win. I took the money, but I made a silent vow right there. I will not become you. We hugged briefly. It was like hugging a statue made of ice, an awkward embrace between two strangers sharing the same blood. Then she opened the back door herself, checking if the path was clear. Quick now. Your father is a heavy sleeper, but you never know. With my heart beating like a drum, I slipped out of the house, the improvised bundle firm in my hands. The night air was cold, heavy with the smell of wet earth and grass. I followed through the back of the neighbors' yards, avoiding the main streets, until getting to the small street Sebastian Church, in the center of Jasper. As promised, Great Uncle Arthur was there, a solitary figure leaning against the wall. Upon seeing me, his wrinkled face opened in a smile of relief. You came? He said simply. I came, I replied, still uncertain of what awaited me, but certain that any future would be better than what I left behind. He led me to a simple wagon waiting further ahead, the wheels already ready for the road, the horse grazing peacefully beside. He helped me up and took the reins. Where are we going? I asked as the wagon began to move, creaking slightly on the dirt road. To Indianapolis. To my house. It's no palace, but there is plenty of space for a grandniece. And from there, well, from there you can decide what you want to do with your life. Study. Maybe. You don't seem like the type born to stay still. The wagon advanced slowly into the night, moving away from Jasper, taking me far from everything I knew. I should have been afraid, but instead, I felt a strange peace. For the first time, in many years, maybe for the first time in my life, I was taking the reins of my own destiny. Leaving is the hardest step, but the road to healing is even longer. As those wheels turn, Margaret isn't just leaving a town, she is finally reclaiming her soul. Stay tuned to see how she builds a beautiful life from the ashes of her past. The trip to Indianapolis took almost 2 days. We stopped only to rest the horse and to eat a little of the simple food the great uncle had prepared. During that time, he told me about himself, how he had lived his whole life in Indianapolis, how he had been a teacher before retiring, how he never married, but had a house full of books and a small orchard that was his pride. He also told me more about my mother, about how she was as a girl, cheerful and dreamy until marrying my father. Your grandfather wasn't much different from your father, he explained. Ruth went from one hell to another, thinking she was escaping. When we finally arrived in Indianapolis, I found a city bigger and busier than Jasper. Great Uncle Arthur's house was on the outskirts, a simple construction, but well kept, with a flowered garden in front and an apple orchard in the back, exactly as he had described. "Welcome to your new home, Margaret," he said, helping me down from the wagon, "for as long as you want to stay." In the weeks that followed, I tried to adapt, but the body remembers trauma, my dears. For the first 6 months, I jumped every time Uncle Arthur dropped a spoon in the kitchen. I woke up screaming, thinking I heard my father's heavy boots in the hallway. I apologized 100 times a day for simply existing. Uncle Arthur never got angry. He would just sit me down, hand me a cup of tea, and say, "You are safe here, Margaret. Take up space. Breathe." It took time to unlearn the fear. It took time to realize that a mistake didn't mean a beating. Trauma creates a strange echo, doesn't it? Even in a quiet house, you still wait for the noise. If you are listening to this and you still flinch at loud sounds or apologize for simply existing, please be patient with yourself. You are healing, and healing is brave work. If you are on this journey too, let me know I am not alone. Leave a little heart in the comments. But slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt the girl my father tried to destroy. I was older than the other students. I had to study double to make up for lost time. But every book I opened, every new thing I learned, was like a small act of revenge against everything they had tried to deny me. The great uncle never asked much about what had happened at my parents' house. "The past is like a wound," he said. "Sometimes, the best way to heal is to leave it in peace, not keep poking it." But he was always willing to listen when I myself wanted to talk, without judgments, without trying to minimize what I had lived. It was also he who encouraged me to work part-time at the public library. "You like books, and they need help organizing the collection. Seems like a good combination to me." He was right. In the library, I found not just a job, but a place where I felt useful, respected. The people there, the librarian, Miss Helen, the frequent readers, saw me as myself, not as Frank's daughter, not as the sister of the girl who died, just as Margaret, the dedicated young woman who knew the books like the palm of her hand and always had a reading suggestion on the tip of her tongue. It was at the library, too, that eventually I met Ethan again. He had moved to Indianapolis after his father's death to work at the branch of the hardware store an uncle owned in the city. Upon seeing me behind the checkout counter, his face lit up with a smile so genuine I felt my cheeks blush. "Margaret, I thought I'd never see you again. One day you simply disappeared from Jasper." No one could say where to. After that, Ethan started frequenting the library almost daily, even being a slow reader who took weeks to finish a single book. It didn't take long for everyone in town to start commenting about the boy from the hardware store who was clearly in love with Professor Arthur's niece. Life, which before seemed a burden too heavy to carry, gained new colors, new meanings. With the support of great Uncle Arthur, I managed to finish my studies and even take the normal course to become a teacher. The dream I kept since I was a girl. I never went back to Jasper. I heard, through acquaintances who traveled between the towns, that my father died a few years after my escape, a victim of the cirrhosis his daily bourbon finally caused. My mother apparently had moved to a cousin's house in Terre Haute, where she lived modestly, washing clothes for others. I thought many times about looking for her, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was fear of awakening old wounds, or maybe it was the memory of that last night when she herself told me to go and not look back. I prefer to believe that, in her own way, that was the greatest gesture of love she managed to offer. Great Uncle Arthur lived until 92, lucid and active until almost the end. His last act of generosity was leaving me the small house in Indianapolis, the place that had truly become my home. At his funeral, while throwing a handful of dirt on the coffin, I thanked silently the man who had risked everything to save a grand niece he barely knew. "It was a miracle. He appeared right at the time you needed most," commented Ethan, who by that point was already my husband, holding my hand in the cemetery. But I knew it hadn't been a miracle at all. It had been the most basic human essence, that which recognizes the suffering of another and decides not to stand still. It was the courage of a man to see in the present the echo of the past and say, "No, this time it will be different. Here I am, so many years later, back in Jasper." Who would say that one day I would return to the town that was the setting of so much pain? But life has its winding paths and sometimes takes us back to the beginning. Maybe to close circles, maybe to show us how far we have walked. I returned here almost 20 years ago after Ethan passed away. We had built a good life in Indianapolis. We raised our 3 children, Sarah, Caleb, and Arthur. Yes, in honor of my savior. All already adults and on their way when I became a widow. Ethan departed serenely at home, holding my hand. A heart attack that came quickly, without prolonging suffering. I still miss him every day, especially when the smell of fresh coffee fills the kitchen in the morning. He loved being the first to get up just to prepare the coffee the way I liked. After his death, the house in Indianapolis seemed too big, too empty. That was when Sarah, my oldest daughter, suggested I move closer to her. She had settled here in Jasper, where her husband Paul coordinated the farmers' co-op. They had a spacious house and 2 small children who, according to her, needed grandma close by. The decision wasn't easy. Returning here meant facing ghosts I had left behind a long time ago, but it also meant being close to the grandkids, helping them grow, being a constant presence in their lives, something I never had in my own childhood. So, I sold the house Great-Uncle Arthur had left me and bought this one where I live today. A simple but cozy cottage, with a porch from where I can see the sunset, and a yard big enough for my herb and flower garden. It is just 3 blocks from Sarah's house, close enough to see my grandkids almost every day, but with enough space to maintain my independence. In the first months after the move, I confess I walked tense through the streets of the town, always waiting to encounter some face from the past, someone who could recognize me and bring up stories I preferred to leave buried. But soon I realized that Jasper had changed as much as I had. The few who could still remember the girl Margaret, daughter of the foreman Frank, were now elderly people who barely recalled their own lunch from the day before. Besides, the town itself had grown, modernized. Where before there were only simple houses and dirt roads, now there were buildings, asphalt, new stores. The places that held my worst memories didn't exist anymore. My childhood house was demolished to make way for a small supermarket, and even the old cemetery where Emily was buried had been transferred to a more outlying, more modern area. It was after a few years here that I discovered my passion for cooking. It started unpretentiously, preparing special dishes for the birthdays of grandkids Mason and Grace. The children loved it, and soon the neighbors started asking if I accepted orders for parties and family reunions. What was a pastime turned into a small source of income and, more importantly, of joy. I specialized in typical dishes of the region, the ones I learned observing my grandmother, and later perfected with my own touches. My hot apple cider became a sort of local legend, especially in the harsh winters, when people line up at my door on weekends to take a jug home. Today my days are filled with small joys that, added up, form a full life. I wake up early with the first rooster crow, more out of habit than necessity. I prepare my coffee, sit on the porch to see the day born while I do my knitting. Another passion I discovered late. I tend my garden in the first hours of the morning when the sun is still soft. 3 times a week, I give volunteer literacy classes for adults at the neighborhood association. I never stopped being a teacher, even after retiring. Seeing the shine in the eyes of a man or woman of 60 when they manage to read their first complete sentence is one of the greatest rewards life can offer. On Wednesdays and Fridays, I receive my grandkids after school. Mason, now 15, is quiet and studious, like his grandfather Ethan, while Grace, at 12, has my stubbornness and my taste for books. I sit with them at the kitchen table, help with homework when I can, and then we prepare some special recipe together, usually sweets, which are their favorites. On Sundays, Sarah's house fills with the whole family. My other children, Caleb and Arthur, come from Evansville and Indianapolis with their families, and we gather for a lunch that starts at noon and only ends when the sun is already low. On those days, I am the one who commands the stove, preparing the dishes everyone waits for anxiously. The fried chicken with mashed potatoes, the meatloaf in the iron skillet, and of course, my desserts. The peach cobbler for the adults, the rice pudding for the children. It is breathtaking, isn't it? To see the girl who fled in the dead of night return as the matriarch of a loving family. She proved that trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. It can be the foundation for a fortress of love. She reclaimed her hometown and turned a place of fear into a sanctuary. But as the sun sets on those perfect Sundays, there is still one shadow that lingers, a memory that love can soften, but never fully erase. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the only sound is the chirping of crickets in the yard, I allow myself to think of Emily. I imagine how her life would have been if she had had the chance to live it. Would she have married? Would she have children? Would she be a doting aunt to mine? I will never know the answers to these questions, of course, but I like to think that somehow she is present in the small joys of my day-to-day, in Grace's smile, which sometimes reminds me so much of hers, in the delicacy of some flowers in my garden, in the way the late afternoon light enters through the kitchen window, transforming the common into extraordinary, exactly how she saw the world. Time didn't erase the pain completely. I think certain wounds never heal entirely, but it taught me to live with it, to transform it into something that, if not beautiful, at least makes sense. My dears who accompanied me up to here on this journey of memories, some so painful, others so full of hope, I want to leave you with some words I carry in my heart, words that time and life taught me, often in the hardest way. If you are living in a house where fear is greater than love, where words hurt more than silence, know that this is not normal, it is not right, and mainly, it is not your fault. For a long time, I believed there was something wrong with me, that if I were different, quieter, more obedient, more invisible, maybe my father wouldn't be so cruel. Maybe my mother would have had more courage to defend us. But the truth I discovered is that the problem was never in me or my sister. The problem was in my father's heavy hands, in my mother's distant look, in the cycle of violence that began long before we were born, and that, without help, would continue long after us. This cycle only breaks when someone, it can be yourself, or it can be a great uncle, who appears suddenly, or a friend, a teacher, a neighbor, sees what is happening and says, "This has to stop." It was like that with me. It was Uncle Arthur's attentive look that saved me. He saw the signs everyone else pretended not to see. Therefore, I ask you, who are watching me, be attentive. Truly look at the people around you, at the children who suddenly become very quiet, at the teenagers who don't bring friends home, at the women with lowered gazes and excuses, always ready for unexplained bruises. Sometimes, a real look, a sincere question, an extended hand is enough to change or save an entire life. And if you are the one suffering, remember, you deserve a life without fear. You deserve to wake up without that weight in your chest, that anxiety about what might happen today, no matter what they told you, no matter how many times they made you feel small or weak or unworthy. That is a lie. The biggest lie that exists. You know, when I was the age of my granddaughter Grace, I thought my destiny was sealed, that I would end up like my mother, or worse, like my sister Emily. But here I am, 76 years later, sitting on the porch of my own house, surrounded by a family I built with love, not fear. If I could go back in time and say something to that scared girl, I would say, hang in there, it will hurt, it will seem impossible sometimes, but one day you will be sitting in the sun, at peace, and all this will seem like a distant nightmare. That is what I wish for each of you, who perhaps is going through similar situations, that you find your way to the light, that you find people who extend a hand when you need it most, that you never lose hope that a different life is possible. And to all of you who accompanied me up to here, my special request. If you liked my story, if it touched your heart in some way, please click subscribe and activate that bell. We are building a community of survivors here, and I want you in it. And I have a question for you today. Who is the Uncle Arthur in your life? Who was the one person who saw you when you felt invisible? Or maybe you need to be that person for someone else today. Leave the name of your angel in the comments, or simply write the word freedom if you are still fighting for yours. I read every single one, and I will be praying for you. Do this now. Don't wait another minute. Let's fill this comment section with light. Thank you for listening to this old lady. Remember, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. May God bless each one's path.